this episode of In the House, we speak with Brooke Vandenhouten about what to expect if you are considering a career in architecture or construction. As an emerging professional, Brooke discusses some of the pros and cons of higher education and licensure. What are some things you should expect when entering the workforce and the challenges that come with gaining a foothold in the industry? We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please share the podcast with a friend. Thanks for listening. Upgrade your construction layouts with trademarks. These heavy-duty vinyl markers are designed to withstand harsh job site conditions. They're durable, waterproof, and perfect for marking locations for electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and more. Available in trade-specific colors, trademarks make communication with your team simple, professional, and reliable. Whether you're recording benchmarks, elevations, or centerlines, trademarks ensure your layouts stay intact, even under heavy traffic. New customers enjoy 15% off at checkout. Visit trademarklayout.com to get yours today. Well, Brooke, I appreciate you coming on. So you actually reached out to us a while back, and you wanted to talk about, new hires or, people who are just entering the design workforce or the architecture workforce. And so that kind of intrigued me because that's not a topic that we've ever really talked about on this podcast is, expectations for people just joining the industry, especially on the design side. That's something that I know very little about, given that I've just been on the build side for the past 10 or 11 years. But so I'll kind of open the floor to you. What is it about that topic that you wanted to really dive into?
Yeah. The emerging professional.
It is. Yeah. That's, I think, the official title is emerging professional.
Emerging professional. Okay.
Emerging professional.
Is that the correct way to say it?
Yeah, and it's super important with just in the training piece of that. The average size of a architecture firm is 3 people.
That's pretty small.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. And obviously, there's a wide range of different types of architecture firms and sizes, but that's the average, which is crazy. And so I think it's great to hear. We really want to hear your perspective as someone who's trying to grow in the industry, learn, see where opportunities, and how you can have a great career and fit. And it sounds like a lot of the work that you've gotten to do so far is on the residential side. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I've worked at residential design build firms for the last 3 years. So that's awesome. That's pretty much all I know.
Hey, that's great. Yeah. We got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Where'd you graduate?
I graduated from Texas A&M.
Nice.
So class of 21.
Another Aggie. Great.
That's awesome. That's unfortunate.
So what, if you can, give us your background a little bit. Like what made you want to get into architecture? And what were some of your expectations, going through A&M and joining the workforce? What did you think it was going to be like, and has it lived up to that?
Yeah. I guess I didn't really know that I always wanted to do architecture. I think that growing up, that kind of felt like I said I wanted to be like a tooth fairy or something.
Mm-hmm. What are these?
It was like unheard of in my family. I come from a family of engineers and teachers, so to pick something different was like kind of out there. But I was really good at math, and I always loved puzzles and putting things together, and so I was like, why not architecture? And I guess my first semester at A&M, I actually accidentally signed up for the wrong major.
Oh, that's great.
Because they have a program called urban planning, and I thought that that's what architecture was, because A&M's architecture program is called environmental design, and I was like, that's plants. I don't want to do plants.
Wait a second.
So I spent my whole first semester in urban planning, and then I was able to switch. But I think that the education there, as far as I know, I think A&M's architecture program is one of like the best in the country. But I think they focus a lot on commercial work for sure. That was a huge push for pretty much everybody. And I do feel like a lot of the things that I learned were just very kind of abstract concepts, you know, taking into account how light interacts in a space and, you know, voids versus solids and massing and things like that, but not necessarily.
We need to teach you about that.
But
Brooke and I were going to have a little architecture class with you.
That's fine.
But not necessarily the functional things that you need in real life. So when I first started in, you know, the workforce, I remember asking people like, what's a standard window size? And, you know, how big is door trim?
Yeah.
And things like that, because I had literally no idea.
Totally.
So, I guess, you know, my expectations going into the workforce from college were that I was probably going to be around a lot of people wearing like all black, because that's what architects do.
Turtlenecks.
Yeah. And that
skinny jeans.
And that I was going to know absolutely nothing. And some of those things were true. But overall, I think it's been a good experience. Everywhere that I've been has been super welcoming of me being young and not knowing a lot.
That's awesome.
And willing to teach, and you know, that's great. But I do think there's another side to it that, you know, you need to be around people who are willing to teach and willing to, you know, to take the extra time that it takes to educate the people around you, because oftentimes it is a lot easier to just go right to whoever's in charge and ask for the answer instead of, and I've been on job sites plenty of times where they'll be talking about something. I'm just standing there like, I have literally no idea what's going on. And this conversation is way over my head. And then, you know, I have to wait till we get in the car to go home to ask all my questions. So you have to be around the right people for sure. There's pros and cons to it all, but it's been fun.
I had a sobering moment one time. It was one of my first jobs, and I kind of an offhanded comment from a manager. He was like, you know, we kind of take the attitude that for the first year, you are not going to bring any value, and anything that you do is bonus. And that was a really sobering moment for me. I'm like, okay, wow, I really got a lot to learn here.
Like 10 years. Do you bring in value now?
Well, you know, jury's still out on that. Jury's still out.
It does seem like I get exactly what you're saying about the education side of things. I mean, I also went through A&M, but I went through the construction science program, which is under the School of Architecture. But it does seem like there's this disconnect between design and construction. And I never quite understood that, because, you know, when you're in the real world, design architects and builders need to work together, you know, but when you're getting your education, it seems very segmented and separated. And it's like, you know, it seems counterintuitive. It seems like you're not really getting the full education, the full experience that you need.
Yeah.
And I get it, you know, you talk a lot about big concepts, big ideas, stuff like that. But it's like, man, it seems like as you're entering the workforce, you know, maybe junior or senior year, you start getting into more detailed, you know, into the, you know, the day-to-day information that you're going to need, and or at the very least, you know, equip yourself with like who to reach out to. Like if you don't have an answer, like who do you even ask? You know?
Yeah. And I do think that that's something that I've loved about working at a design build firm, is that I get to see some of those things come to life.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I'm not entirely sure how firms that do just architecture work. You know, I'm sure they're out on the job site, but the things that we do, you know, I get to go out on the job site the next month and see it come to life, and you know, get to work with people on my team to help me understand those things. And you know, that's been super fun.
It's probably, you know, have you been able to build relationships across, you know, outside of just the people that you're, you know, doing drawings with and designing with, into the construction side as well?
I would say so. And I've learned, you know, the kinds of questions to ask that, you know, gets me the answer that I'm looking for. And I do like being around the people in the field. I think that it's always helpful to understand kind of like how they're using the plans that we put together. And, you know, I think maybe it was you were on a podcast like a couple weeks ago or something. You were talking about how you had put together plans and then you were in the field looking at those plans.
Yep, 100%.
And I was like, that's totally me.
You're like, I've been there. Yes.
And so the times that I have been able to connect with trades, that's always my first question is like, hey, this is how I'm drawing the plans.
Is that helpful?
Is that how you're using them? Or
such a good
is it
question.
like every time you get this set of plans, you're like, who drew this thing?
Yeah.
You know,
what the heck?
Yeah.
The first project I ever worked on, well, that's not true. One of the first projects right out of school I worked on was a project in Maine. And at the time I was based in Texas, and so how do you interact with people building something so far away? And that's definitely one of the challenges as you know the world kind of adapts this remote work kind of piece. But I love that you get to be in an environment, especially early on in your career, where you're getting to work alongside. I'm guessing most of y'all's projects are local.
Yeah.
And so you get reps with rubbing shoulders with all sorts of people from trades, from, managers and superintendents, and then design side. That's really awesome.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Do you get to communicate with trades on a regular basis? Do they get to weigh in at all? Like if you run into a detail where it's like, man, I don't really know how this is going to fit together, can you call the sub who would actually be performing the work? It's like, hey, can you sit down and kind of help think through this? Or
I would say that's not necessarily me, but there are people in our firm that do have those conversations.
Yeah.
We'll call the engineer,
maybe a project manager or something like that.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
That's still a little over my head to have that conversation.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I've got a question for you. What is your ideal work day look like?
Oh gosh.
I mean, it could vary day to day, but
I'm somebody
Brooke gets to make the rules. What does it look like?
Yeah. I'm somebody who thrives under a little bit of pressure. I do not like to be bored.
Yeah.
So if it's a slow day, it'll be the longest day of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So ideal work days, probably there are other people in the office because I work in a really small firm. So occasionally it's just me there.
Yeah.
So ideal days, there's other people there to keep me company.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a client meeting or two to take up a couple hours of the day to get our creative juices flowing.
Yeah.
Probably getting to go through a variety of things. Some days we're doing CD sets, some days we're floor planning, some days we're in the concept phase, and it does get slow whenever all you're doing all day is working on a framing plan.
Totally.
So, to get to have a day where you're doing a lot of different things is always really fun because it goes by so fast, and you're just making I feel like I made a lot of progress on days like that.
Yeah.
So
I that's something whenever I'm doing drawings, I don't know if this just says something about my brain, but the ability to move in between tasks, and not when I have to do one thing for like 4 hours, and I'm doing this door schedule for 4 hours,
right.
I'm just like, I feel like I come away from that just like, stupider, at the end.
Yeah, that's
but
really
when
good.
I can bounce in between things, it really helps with each individual tasks.
Definitely.
I really enjoy that.
Do you think your education helped equip you for your role?
Probably not too much. I guess because, like I said, I feel like, I'm sure there are little things. I learned how to use the programs that we use. That was definitely a huge thing. I would not be able to learn Revit on my own at this day and age. And just kind of understanding the very basic concepts about, why we do building sections and, why we design for the user's intent in mind and things like that.
Yeah,
definitely helped. But from a logistical standpoint of, understanding, why we use a 2x6 over a 2x4 and little things like that, probably not.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for my education anyways.
So. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's more to, I guess, higher education than just the material that you learn. It's
100%.
It's, the experience. It's having to manage your own schedule, manage your own life, your personal life as well as your student life and all that. And
just go social skills.
Yes.
Part of it.
So, there's more to it, I guess, to develop you as a person. But I kind of share that sentiment as far as feeling like you weren't really equipped for your role. I mean, even on the construction science side of things, it was more commercial oriented, which, I did not go into commercial. And it felt like most of the information we were getting was very outdated, and it's not very applicable to today. Now that may have changed since I graduated. I don't know, but it seems like very little of what I learned can actually be applied to what I do, and most of the stuff anyway, as far as like scheduling, building a schedule, you can't learn that in a classroom or reading a book. Yeah. You have to get out there.
You got to do it.
And you got to just put your nose to the grindstone and figure it out. You got to dive in, take some chances, take some risk, and just know in the back of your head, you're going to look stupid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years and I still make mistakes and look stupid. Mm-hmm. It's just part of learning, and you never stop learning. Mm-hmm. So it's like you just know coming into it, you're going to look like an idiot. People might think you're an idiot, whatever. Who cares? You keep plugging away at it. You keep grinding and you'll make it through, and you're going to be better when you get to the other end. You're going to be better and you're going to be stronger. And you know what? You're going to be able to handle more of a workload, and now you're going to handle bigger tasks and your own project or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It kind of brings the question to my mind, like, why do we even need higher education for these types of positions? I mean, right? I mean, for years, people have been building homes. Like, you don't need to go to college to build a house. I mean, do you really need college or higher education to teach design? I mean, it's kind of, it's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, just because you have a degree, does that make you a good architect? I mean, and I'm not trying to like step on any toes.
No, 100%.
I'm just
asking the question.
Asking the question. Y'all are the architects.
Well, just one point I wanted to make on that of Brooke. It sounds like you worked some during school.
I did,
and I really love that from the standpoint of you prioritized. Hey, okay, I'm working towards this degree, and I'm going to go get in the real world and kind of test that out as I'm doing it. I thought that was a great step.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that really solidified for me where I wanted to be, that residential construction is where it's at. And it definitely helped me get my feet wet and understand, like, okay, this is what the real world is like. But I think to answer your question, Lonnie, I would definitely agree that as much as, you can be really smart in college and you can have all the book smarts and you could, absolutely be the best person in your class at building a door schedule or drawing a plan, but if that's not how they're doing it in the field, then you are going to look like an idiot. And those are things that you can only learn being out in the field or in the real world and understanding. So I'm sure that there are people out there that would definitely argue you need the educational standpoint side of things, but I think you're right. There are, the older generation has been building and designing homes with high school diplomas, if even, for so long. And we do have, newer technologies and things today that make things probably harder and easier at the same time.
Sure.
So there's that side of things, but I don't know that you necessarily need the higher education or what it really does. And even for me, like I was telling you, I don't have an accredited architecture degree. So for me to get my license, I either have to go to a different state or I have to go back to school to get more education.
Yeah.
So, and what's that really going to do for me in the long run? It's just
money. That's kind of mind blowing to me. Yeah, we were talking, before we started recording about, licensure and things like that. And it's like, I don't, speaking personally, I don't understand the need for it. What does having a license as far as being an architect is concerned, what does having a license really do for you professionally?
Yeah.
I don't know. That maybe both of y'all can speak to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. The license process was mainly developed to give responsibility to people in the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And so, a lot of different professions have licenses. Medical industry is one of those. And so that was kind of where architecture began to grow out of the necessity for having that. Was, okay, we've got people who are making buildings that the public is using. And if there's just one user, risk of that, not that big. But if you've got, hundreds of people, thousands of people using a building, gosh, we really need to be setting a baseline standard for what knowledge those people have, because a house burns down or as recently explodes with a gas leak.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw that.
Yeah,
that was wild.
Yep.
Thankfully, casualties of that, not that big. But if you have a, stadium or high rise, a lot larger consequences. So that's why the licensure process is there. And I think overall it's good. That's my opinion. But I do think there's some pieces of it that could be adjusted, and the standards and how that plays out that could be better. One of the things that was a tension point as I was going through the licensure process that I think has since been altered, but it was a very sequence-based process. So you had to do your schooling, then you could start your hours, and then you could do your testing. Well, I think they've changed that now in that those things can be happening simultaneously. But there's just really a tension point. And Brooke, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, of the just kind of necessity to be licensed sooner. It seems like there's just a demand for that. And then, to be able to get to the next hurdle, which is, being able to take on projects. And it seems like in my mind that the license process right now is creating more of a barrier than it is a baseline for that process, particularly when you're thinking about residential.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the process in itself is quite challenging, and from what you described, it's pretty much the same. They do offer an integrated path to licensure where you can do the testing and the education and the experience kind of all in conjunction, but only certain schools offer that. And so essentially it is the same, where you have to have the education and then you get the experience and then you can begin testing. So it's quite a long process, and it takes time and it's expensive. But on the residential side of things, I'm not quite sure why you need it. And it is a requirement for most companies. I remember whenever I was searching for the job that I'm in currently, pretty much every job listing said you need to either be on the path to licensure or be licensed. Yeah. And I think most residential firms are not necessarily using that for anything other than to say we have X number of licensed architects. And there are communities I know that require to have a licensed architect on staff. You have to have somebody to seal your plans. But not every community does that. And I think from a commercial aspect, you're right. People should be licensed. There's a lot more safety and welfare involved there. And to some extent in the residential side, always build safe.
Yeah,
but
100%. Yeah.
But I don't know. entirely why it's such a hurdle for people to get over.
It's ironic. The building industry, the home building, is completely opposite, where it's one of the few industries that has very little regulation. And so it's interesting that architecture has a really strong standardized process, and home building, it's really kind of Wild West approach. I know that's different in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
If you go to the East Coast, for example, home building has you have to be licensed, and there's certain requirements to that. But here in Texas, it's not the case.
Yeah.
Thank God for Texas. Well, that's kind of the point, I guess. And Brooke, I think you touched on that. Was like, what is having a license really like? What do you gain from that, really? Because to clarify for people listening, in the state of Texas, like, you don't have to be licensed to design and build homes.
That's correct.
You don't have to have a license, whether you're an architect or whether you're the builder. You don't have to have a license. So it's like, if you already have the ability to design and build a house, why seek licensure? And Michael, you made a really good point about on the commercial side. That's probably the only argument I've ever heard that I kind of agree with for getting a license. But on the same token, you have to go through, if you're building in the city especially, you have to go through a plan review, right, with the city, and then the city stamps it, right? So why do I have to have a license if it's going to go through this design review process and be stamped by the city? Would that not cover, the safety requirements? I mean, isn't that what they're supposed to do with in their design review?
Yeah.
But of course they stamp it, and then they still don't have any of the liability that comes with it. You're still. Yeah. So it's like, what's the point even of doing the review process?
Yeah, the definitely liability is a big topic along those lines. You think about someone's gonna give you insurance to, let's say start a architecture practice. Okay, you're gonna be designing buildings. Well, why should I cover you for that? And if there's some sort of standardized process for that, I don't know that it needs to be licensure. But going back to your point about, being a burgeoning professional and looking for ways that you can grow, and learn in the industry, and looking for companies who are interested in investing in you, I think, following along the licensure path is a potential way to be able to grow, in the industry. Is that the best way? Is that the only way? I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, from my experience, the ways that I've grown the most have been, to what you were saying earlier about on the job,
right.
Anything's done, but, how do we do that well? I mean, one of my favorite classes in university was, we called it our sound building studio, which is kind of a funny name. We built very sound buildings, but we brushed shoulders briefly with students who are in the structural engineering college, and they kind of consulted, and we kind of collaborated on our project, and it was just very brief, but it really, I think, more ways that to your point about, the construction world and the design world seem very isolated from each other, and if there could be more collaboration there, maybe it's design build projects, maybe it's more of a trade school like approach. Sure. I don't exactly know but I think that could be really beneficial for people.
Well, I had a thought. I think it would be very beneficial to, as you're getting your degree, that why don't we force the students to work together? Like, let's say you build mobile homes or something, right? Or it could be, funded by the school or whatever, and then you donate it to, some cause, or it could be a family home or something.
Yeah.
It's donated, but have the architecture students design, and then have the engineers engineer, and then have the building students build. And it's a kind of like a capstone project, if you will, that, all of the students in the different disciplines have to work together to design and execute this home, right? Through, their last semester or 2 semesters, whatever, of college. And that way you're getting like real world experience, in a controlled environment, right? So you still have the professors there and the teachers there to kind of help guide along, but it's like, man, then you're really doing in practice what you're going to be doing in the real world. It's like,
I think that could be interesting. The idea of it scares me because of the amount of group projects I remember being on in school, and I would hate to have my building fall down because John didn't show up and I had to do his work for him.
Hey, but I mean, doesn't that happen in real life?
You're
though?
Right, it does. Yeah, it definitely does.
I mean, you're relying on people. No matter what you're doing, you're relying on people to do the best job that they can, and sometimes they don't. Oftentimes they don't.
That could definitely be like a real test of the knowledge that you've learned and putting it to practice. So that would be interesting. I'm sure that there are schools out there that do programs like that. So
yeah, that's what I was just looking up. The University of Kansas has a studio called Studio 804, and it's a year-long studio, so it blocks out 2 semesters, and they design and build a home.
That's pretty cool.
It's a great program. I had a friend of mine do it many years back, and I think they put out a book on the projects that they've done throughout the years, and they have somehow created I'm a fuzzy on the details, but they've somehow created a way that it funds itself as well. I'm not sure,
like a nonprofit.
Yeah, I think there's something like that going on there. But those types of programs I think really could be emphasized more in the design world, and probably on the construction side too. I think there could be a way to incorporate, thinking through the, design and then executing it. I think everyone would really benefit from that.
Yeah. I think there are some electives that you can take that's sort of along those lines, where you're working with architecture students and engineers, but I guess I'm speaking more along the lines of making it like a mandatory thing.
Yeah.
Like all students would have to participate in.
I think that'd be great.
And get real world experience. But
I think it could even be just, my requirement to graduate was that I had to either study abroad or do an internship. And there are people that pick study abroad. I ended up doing an internship, which I think benefited me greatly. But maybe making that more of a requirement.
Agreed.
Every student has to do 1 or 2 internships, throughout their
I learned more. I think, what is it, a 5-month internship? 5 or 6 months?
It's like 15 weeks. So it's a whole semester.
Yeah, it's a semester, but it's like I learned more in that semester of my internship than I did, the rest of the time in college. Like, because that was real, where like you were out in the field, you were doing the job, and you were put in the position that you had to make decisions. And I was like, man, when the rubber hits the road, like, that's where you learn. Getting the boots on the ground experience. And I learned more during that internship than any other time. But if y'all had some advice for people who, maybe they're thinking about getting a degree in architecture or design, or maybe they're on that path already, like what advice would y'all have for somebody who's going through that?
That's a great question. I guess I would say try to pick a school that does have a program similar to that, or structures their education requirements based off of something similar, where instead of learning such abstract things, you're at least learning things that are, more real world. And, I know that that's hard for people as they're going into picking schools and things like that. But you really, you have to do your research.
Yeah.
And, I think that would be my advice, is try to find somewhere that is going to put you on the right path to success.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's great advice. I've got, a couple of programs that, that jumped to mind. That Kansas program, Auburn has a rural studio. It's been award-winning program that's gained national attention for a long time, and I think it's it's interesting. Different schools, once you really dive in, their programs tend to kind of specialize in something. Maybe it's kind of net positive or zero energy sustainability stuff, or maybe it's high design, very artistic influenced stuff. So many different. It's not a cookie cutter educational world out there. There's a lot of different options.
Do you think coming out of A&M, do they equip you to go directly into the workforce, or to be able to branch out and start your own company?
I couldn't imagine anybody going straight from college anywhere to start your own company. That would be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Is it impossible? What are the
impossible? Nothing's impossible.
Of course.
So that's hard. But I'm sure there are people out there that, if you have a lot of experience, that you could graduate and be able to start your own company and do your own thing. And props to those people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it, for the most part, equips you to go into the workforce and be willing to learn, and it sets you up, on the right path with the tools that you need.
Yeah.
You just might not know how to use those tools yet.
So you think before really branching out and starting your own thing, you might need a little bit more experience in the workforce.
Yeah.
For a few years before getting into that.
For sure.
Michael, you kind of shake your head. You agree?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think it's, it's just like if you were going to hire a lawyer, you would want someone who has experience, and, or, if you were going to, go to the doctor, you want to make sure they know what they're doing, and you're not the first, person that they're,
you're the guinea pig.
Right. And that's why we have friends and family and community, obviously, when people transition, or, if they transition to running their own practice, there's test runs in there, and that's a natural part of the process, but definitely helpful to be learning underneath someone. But that said, I think there's definitely room for being able to bring your own projects on inside those firms, and I think that's definitely a tension point in the industry of maybe in building too. It might be less in building, but in architecture, it's kind of like you have someone else giving you the projects, and then suddenly it's a switch flips, and you're supposed to be bringing in all the projects. And you're like, well, this just went from 0 to 100 here.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a way where that could be a little bit more natural process.
How does that even happen? How do you bring in projects? What does that even look like?
I think that, building is naturally very community driven.
Sure.
And I think relationships are a big part of that. But just thinking about the projects that people have asked me to do, or I've gotten to work on, the ones, those have all almost entirely been relationships, word of mouth.
Sure.
I know at Daglish, but when we're thinking about marketing, well, how do we do that? Well, our best marketing tool is a previous client, and and obviously, you have to get that ball started somewhere, but I think community is a big part of that.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's super true. And there are people that I know now that were in the workforce for, 5 or 10 years and are now wanting to start their own firm and are dealing with that struggle of how do you find clients. And I think you're right. The word of mouth is the best way, and to have people that have seen your work and know what you do and the kind of person that you are, those are the best ones to refer you and to get you, work in the future.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Brooke, I really appreciate you reaching out and, proposing this topic. It's not something that even came to my mind about, joining the industry and what that looks like and what your expectations should be. So I thought it was great that you reached out and proposed that, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
and
thanks so much,
Brooke. Really enjoyed it
and talking with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.